Hi everybody and welcome to week 4, part 281, Art of the Ancient Aegean, and we're in lecture part 1, which covers Cycladic art and art of early Minoan culture. Chapter 4 covers our third Mediterranean early civilization group, the Aegean. The area and culture we refer to as Aegean includes island cultures of the Aegean Sea, over here, the Mediterranean Sea, which is the larger sea, and geographic areas that are now part of mainland Greece and its immediate surroundings in Europe and Asia. Aegean culture is considered to be the mother culture of the ancient classical Greeks of Chapter 5. Like the previous early civilizations that we've already discussed, the cultures of the Aegean appear to have had written languages, advanced architectural techniques, metalworking, and systems of rulership and religion. They also conducted trade over long distances with many contemporary cultures, including Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations, with which ancient Aegean cultures overlap chronologically. We'll see, however, that the state of Aegean archaeology and linguistics often makes it necessary to speculate on the nature of Aegean cultures. One thing we can be certain of is the importance of the sea in the lives of the Aegean peoples. This makes them rather distinct from the previous early civilizations we've already studied. It also means that the occasional shipwreck find, like the Ururun shipwreck mentioned in the book, can also help to fill out our understanding of early Aegean civilization. The Aegean falls somewhere in between ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt when it comes to migration and continuity. While the region isn't as prone to upheaval as Mesopotamia, nor is it as stable as Egypt, the three main cultures that make up the Aegean civilization are also somewhat different from one another, as will become clear in this module. The Cycladic culture is the earliest known Aegean culture. It's based in the Cyclades, these islands right here, purple on your screen. They're a group of islands off the eastern coast of Greece in the Aegean Sea. The later Minoan culture is based in Crete, a large island, as you can see, to the south of Greece, but spread into the Cyclades and into mainland Greece. The still later Mycenaean culture of mainland Greece had its roots in the city of Mycenae, which you can see here, but spread out into Crete and the Cyclades. We know little of the Cycladic people originally, but art and architecture of Minoan and Mycenaean cultures, along with later literary references to these cultures, help to shape our knowledge of them. Cycladic art, 3000 to 1600 BCE. Cycladic culture is the oldest known culture of the Aegean culture group of civilization. The islands were called the Cyclades by the later Greeks because they formed a rough circle, or cycle, around the sacred island of Delos. From archaeological analysis of their agricultural techniques and architecture, Cycladic culture is influenced by both mainland Greece and Turkey, supported by the island's proximity to both of them. Anatolia is mainland Turkey. We would call Turkey today. The ancient Cycladic people had no known written language that archaeologists have found. It appears that people started living on the islands of the Cyclades as early as 6000 BCE. They made ceramics and traded with neighbors. After 3000 BCE, Cycladic peoples appear to have traded in crops as well as weaving, a fiber art form that forms cloth. They also began to produce sculptures in marble. The Cycladic figurines, as they are known today, were made with a local marble. They were formed with the help of obsidian blades and hard emery stone, which was ground to use for abrasive. Both of those volcanic stones were available locally. The Cycladic figures are generally very schematized or abstracted images of the body, usually female. While your books call them nude, it is difficult to say if they are intended to be naked, like our Paleolithic images of women from Chapter 1. That's because the figures appear to have been covered at one time in decoration and paint, very little of which still remains. You can see a little bit of it here, maybe a little bit of it here and there, and here, right? And here definitely. This paint depicts features that may represent tattooing or scarification or clothing or none of those. We don't really know. The images in paint sometimes seem randomly applied, as in the illustration on the screen. At other times, as in the Cycladic head found on page 84, they are placed very symmetrically. Some male figurines have been found, or at least figurines that can't be identified as female through secondary sex characteristics. An example on the screen shows one such figure playing a harp. The type of figure is unusual as most of them strike the same pose. The more typical pose has the head tilted back, the arms crossed over the body, you can see in these examples, and the toes pointed downward. Recent analysis of the significance of this pose have led scholars to believe that they were images of the dead. If we look at them as if they were laying down, not standing up, the pose makes much more sense. This interpretation is supported by the fact that most have been found, or purported to have been found originally, in graves. One more example of such a figure is a sculpture group, which you can see here. That is also quite unusual. Sculpture grouping would be a group of sculptures that is more than one person. This group appears to depict two figures, holding up and carrying a traditionally posed Cycladic figure. Could this be a sculpture that depicts a funeral? Or perhaps it depicts artists or funerary attendants hefting up a large Cycladic figure. As some of them seem to have been as large as 5 feet tall, that certainly seems to be possible. Eventually, Cycladic culture becomes subsumed in Minoan culture, which is discussed starting in this next section. Although people have been living on the island of Crete since around 3000 BCE, the fully developed culture we call Minoan didn't emerge till about 1900 BCE. Minoan society was self-sufficient, producing its own foods, timber, plaster, and other materials. Still, Minoans engaged in overseas trade for foreign goods, including metals, one material that they couldn't really produce themselves. It seems the Minoans had good trade relationships with other cultures in and around the Mediterranean. They had several excellent ports for this purpose, but it seems that they had no navy to speak of. It's believed by most Aegean scholars that Minoan life was relatively peaceful, with little need for fortified architecture or military. At least it was, until it encounters the mainland Mycenaeans towards the end of the Minoan civilization. We don't know what the Minoans called themselves. In modern times, Minoan culture gets its name from the legend of King Minos, a ruler of Crete according to much later Greek mythology. But the Minoans actually had 3 distinct written languages. One of these has been deciphered, Linear B, which you can see here, which has proven to be an early form of Greek brought with the Mycenaeans from the mainland Greece when they conquered the Minoans. 2 earlier languages, Linear A and Cretan hieroglyphics, have not been deciphered. For the first time in our studies, we are dealing with a literate society, but we are unable to use their literature in order to better understand them. This has been a source of frustration for Minoan scholars since the end of the 19th century. Fortunately, the large amount of artworks and architectural sites have been found that provide some evidence of the culture. The religion of the Minoans is also not known well or understood for certain. Many objects indicate that they may have worshipped a bull god or goddess and a snake god or goddess. Images of bees, axes, and pillars appear to have symbolic significance. There's some evidence that a holy family, including 2 goddesses and a child, is important to the Minoan religion. However, no deciphered written records reveal any information about Minoan religion. We'll examine some so-called religious artworks later and see what they might tell us about Minoan worship. Near the end of the 19th century, several self-styled and self-trained archaeologists became interested in the Greek Bronze Age. 2 of them, Sir Arthur Evans and Heinrich Schliemann, are credited with significant discoveries in Minoan and Mycenaean culture. These archaeologists, working when the discipline itself was in its infancy, were largely looking for evidence of real-life sites associated with mythology. Schliemann worked on the site in Turkey that he believed to be the Troy or Ilium of the Trojan War, the perhaps historical, perhaps mythological war described in Homer's epic poems Iliad and the Odyssey. Schliemann also excavated Mycenae, also believed to be a significant site of the Trojan War, and the site of the Greeks. We'll discuss that in the next part. Sir Arthur Evans set about uncovering the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete. Evans and his team, as well as later archaeologists like Harriet Boyd Hawes, have uncovered and restored many significant objects. Yet, as we will see with Schliemann's Mycenae, Evans' Minoan excavations were not without major issues of academic rigor. At the time, archaeology was part science, part treasure hunt, and clearly many such would-be scientists went into their work with prejudicial ideas and conclusions drawn long ago. Often Evans and Schliemann perpetuated assumptions or myths through their lackadaisical treatment, mishandling, and wild misinterpretation of evidence. There are even a few instances of objects that were supposedly found by the teams at Mycenae and Crete, but upon later and closer inspection were clearly fakes. While much is owed to these adventurers for often using their own money and resources to uncover magnificent discoveries, and the imagination it took to take those first steps and dig those first holes, perhaps just as much is owed to them for providing a cautionary example of what not to do in order to carry out scientific archaeological study and preserve evidence. You can read more about them in Pioneers of the Aegean Archaeology on page 85. Despite the relatively small number of absolutely datable objects found in the Minoan realm, which includes Crete and the Cyclades and some settlements on the mainland, a reliable chronology of Minoan culture has been developed through relative dating. Relative dating, you'll recall from Chapter 1, is the dating of objects according to which is older or newer. Generally, Minoan chronology is divided into the Old Palace period, the New Palace period, and a late Minoan period, loosely dating towards the end of its fluorescence, 1450 to 1100. As your textbook points out, however, these date ranges have changed over the years and will probably change in the future as more discoveries turn up and as we learn more about the ancient civilization of Crete. The Old Palace period, 1900 to 1700 BCE. The earliest major archaeological site in Crete is at Knossos on the northern coast. See it here. This site appears to have been a sort of capital for the Minoan culture. The site is best known for the Palace of Knossos, which you're seeing in an illustration here and an aerial photo there. This citadel-like structure at Knossos is also found elsewhere in Crete and may have been an administrative center. The structure has been called a palace for convenience ever since Evans' time, but according to experts on early civilizations, there is no evidence that it served as a palace for any king or queen. Suites and rooms in the structure radiate out from a central courtyard, which you can see here, which is open to the sky. These rooms are connected through staircases, which you can see here and there, creating an increasingly complex structure. Mud brick walls were faced with dressed stone, and roofs were supported by wooden columns, which you can see in red here. Interior rooms were covered in fresco paintings, which are discussed later. The radial plan of the building, the highly complex arrangement of rooms, the dressed stone veneer walls, and the well-frescoed walls are closely associated with Minoan style in every area of Minoan influence. You can find the Great Staircase. Great Staircase. Yes. The Great Staircase and other sections of the palace structure are supported by what are supposed to look like inverted tree trunks used for pillars. They're wider at the top than at the bottom and painted red, then they're topped with a cushion-like capital. You can see them here too. Many aspects of the Minoan palace structure are considered unusual in early civilizations. The radial plan with a courtyard in the center is not seen anywhere else this early. See the courtyard and how the radial plan comes out from there. Also, despite being apparent administrative centers, the structures were not at all that well fortified, meaning they're not very well defended. But one interesting feature that may explain the lack of tall walls is the fact that the palaces were so complex that they could be described as labyrinthine or maze-like. Interestingly, later Greek myths describe a fantastic Cretan culture led by King Minos, fictional figure for whom the culture is named. According to one myth, Minos angered the sea god Poseidon. In revenge, Poseidon caused Minos' wife, Pasiphae, to fall in love with a bull and mate with it. Their offspring was the Minotaur, a monster with a man's body and a bull's head. Now, remember, this is according to later Greek myth. And according to that myth, this beast was kept by the Cretans, the Minoans, in a labyrinth. Athens, on the mainland Greece, according to this story, was forced by the Minoans to regularly send them 14 youths to be eaten by the Minotaur. They get sent into the labyrinth, never to come out again. Eventually in this story, of course, the Greeks win the day and the Minotaur dies, but not before the Greek hero Theseus has to find the center of the Minoan labyrinth and then find his way out again. So it seems this wild myth has little grains of truth in it. So we'll see bulls were very important to the Minoans. The labyrinth may represent the Minoan palace, like Knossos. This is especially supported by the etymology of the term labyrinth. Labyrinth literally means not maze, but house or palace of the double axes. The double axe, as we'll see in a little bit, is quite an important symbol in Minoan art. Perhaps when the mainland Greeks, the Mycenaeans, came to invade Crete in about 1400 BCE, they found these administrative centers, like the palace at Knossos, to be difficult to negotiate and navigate, and the myth of Theseus is a vague memory of that encounter. Indeed, the labyrinthine structure of the Minoan palace may have been a defensive feature after all. The various rooms of the palace serve a variety of purposes. The building contained workshops, audience halls like the so-called throne room, residential apartments, and storage spaces. See, it had terracotta drain system and lots of large storage containers. These ceramic storage containers are known as pithos or pithoi, plural. They were set into the ground. Many such containers were found by archaeologists, and one time they had contained gallons of wine and oil and other supplies that probably served a large number of people. The pithoi were set into holes in the ground so that when they were refilled, little would be wasted through spillage. You can see the holes that they sat in next to the pieces. Knossos had a terracotta drainage system that allowed for fresh water and sewage to go through. The Old Palace period ends in an earthquake, which set fires at Knossos circa 1700 BCE, which made it necessary to rebuild the Palace of Knossos, hence the title New Palace Period. Some archaeologists tie the destructive end of the Old Palace period to the eruption of Thera in the Cyclades, but there is no real consensus on this theory. Thera, also known today as Santorini, exploded sometime between 1630 and 1600 and created a crescent-shaped crater. This eruption was highly disruptive in the region, especially, of course, to Minoan settlements on Thera, which were practically evaporated by the explosion. The residents do appear to have fled on time. Let's look at some smaller scale art forms. Artists of the Old and New Palace periods created artworks in several forms. Examples of pottery and jewelry especially have survived at Minoan sites. The Old Palace pottery is known as Kamarisware, named for a cave in which several examples were found. The Kamarisware pottery is very thin-walled, with a black, white, and red slip. Thin-walled ceramics are highly desirable because of their light weight as well as a lower likelihood of breakage. The decoration was applied in floral and other abstracted motifs like spirals. Minoan ceramists utilized the potter's wheel to craft globular bodies with hand-applied beak-like spouts. Kamarisware appears to have been popular for trade in the Mediterranean, as examples have been found in many Mediterranean cultures. Metalworking in the Minoan culture seems to have been used primarily for worn objects and ritual items. Minoan artists preferred bronze alloy for some sculptures and gold for jewelry. Small-scale sculptures in bronze include bulls and praying figures. Jewelry in gold includes insect motifs, especially wasps and bees. You can read about filigree, granulation, and other sophisticated gold working techniques on page 90 in your book. Another form of goldsmithing is the signet rings. Signet rings are seals. And these seals are used when they're pressed into something soft like wax to leave an impression. Signet rings and seals, which could also be carved as stone, would have been used to mark objects as well as seal containers. These signet rings on the screen show fairly typical Minoan subject matter. The first ring depicts a man somersaulting over the back of a bull that appears to be running. This activity has been termed bull leaping by modern scholars, and due to the number of high-quality artworks depicting it, it may be a ritual or religious activity. The other ring depicts another sort of ritual, the exact nature of which is unknown, but which resembles rituals depicted on other Minoan artworks. Two women flank a tree, fountain, or an altar. They salute it in a pose that seems to be connected with worship. The women have long hair, which you can see in their back, long and flounced skirts, and prominent breasts. This depiction of Minoan women, we'll see, is also very typical. Here's some smaller metalworking and ceramic images of figures. The New Palace period, 1700 to 1450 BCE. At Knossos, a massive rebuilding and revival of the arts occurred after the earthquake and subsequent eruption of Thera. One major feature of the New Palace period style is the proliferation of frescoes and palace structures. Several examples of these New Palace period frescoes appear in this PowerPoint. The frescoes depict what appear to be priests and priestesses, rituals such as bull leaping and other more everyday activities. These first frescoes are pretty typical of Minoan-style frescoes. They depict women who appear to be participating in an activity that may be ritual in nature. They often bear oil or wine containers, or gesture in prayer, or they might hold snakes. Women are always depicted in the way we saw on the signet ring above. They wear flounced skirts. See one? Find a skirted girl. Here we go. Flounced skirts, tiered skirts, cropped short-sleeved jackets that are open at the bust. Women's skin is very light in these images, practically white, as you can see here and here. Similar to the skin tone depicted in Egyptian images of women. Men also sometimes appear in the frescoes, but not as frequently. One male figure appears to wear an elaborate headdress. He and the fresco of two boys from Akrotiri, which you can see here, the doomed volcanic Minoan outpost at Thera, appear to have a reddish color skin tone. Again, similar to the gender differentiation in Egyptian art. Notice that the figures are all shown in profile, with the frontal eye, which looks as if you're seeing it from the front. See that here, and here, and here, and there. You'll recall this is also common in Egyptian art. In addition to people involved in ritual or everyday activities, frescoes are often displaying beautiful and artistic landscapes. They also seem to depict seascapes from time to time, as in the flotilla fresco. The boxing boys, which you're seeing here, and the girls picking saffron are both from Thera. They show young people, and they're shown in a particular way, with their hair shorn very close to their head, indicated by the blue sort of shadow on their head. So this blue is intended to look like very short buzz-cut hair. They all have one or more ponytails, which their parents have allowed to grow out. The girls you see have a little bangs ponytail and one in the back, and the boys have a few different ones. Again, this is very similar to the way Egyptian children are depicted in art. The bull leaping fresco is another work that supports the importance of this activity in Minoan culture. Like the other frescoes that we've discussed, it also displays some fascinating gender differentiation. The bull appears to be full-on running. One figure somersaults over the back, which you can see here, while two other figures appear at the front and the back of the bull. The figure at the back appears to be ready to catch the somersaulting figure, while the person at the front may be getting ready to leap herself. Notice that the center figure is red, indicating he's male, while the other two figures are very light, almost white colored, indicating they're female. They all wear a similar loincloth. All of this combined with other images of men and women seem to demonstrate something rather unique about gender in Minoan culture. In the vast majority of ancient civilizations, women had to live with rather strict conventions of modesty regarding their state of dress, disproportionate to those governing men's dress. This is because of persistent and sexist idea that women's sexual purity is something of value to be protected. This sort of modest convention appears much less strict, if present at all, in Minoan culture, at least as described in art. Men, too, appear to wear clothes that is relatively revealing. Does this indicate a more egalitarian relationship between the sexes on Crete? The overwhelming number of women in Minoan depictions of ritual may also support this theory of a more equal society. Or does it indicate a greater relaxation of so-called modesty conventions? Or perhaps these images are fantasy and don't depict reality at all. The New Palace period frescoes were mostly found in very fragmentary state. It has taken decades to piece the remains of some of them together. As you look at the larger images of frescoes, keep in mind that the more clean and new-looking areas of the frescoes are reconstructions by artists based on the remaining surviving fresco. Reconstruction artists on Crete and other ancient sites do not wish to confuse the viewer. They want you to know which parts are theoretical and which parts are real, so that you may be allowed to make up your own mind about how accurately the finished fresco